Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jeff Cohen. Today we have a very special guest as we welcome in Scott Merkin of MLB.com. We are super excited to have Scott on today to talk all about the White Sox, what he's been hearing throughout the offseason, working on the White Sox beat, kind of some of the moves, and then we're going to get looking towards spring training. We're only less than a month away at this point from pitchers and catchers reporting to Arizona, which means we've got to look at roster spots, the rotation, prospects that could be cracking, as we love to talk our prospects here. So we're going to get into all of it today, and we're super happy to have Scott on with us. Welcome in, Scott. Appreciate you joining us. And my first question for you is, A, how are you doing? And B, how hard will you be rooting against the Ohio State Buckeyes tonight?
Well, I'm doing okay, except once again, I couldn't get the computer to work for a podcast here, so I'm trying to frame myself where you don't see the mess that is my place behind me there. Hard to do that. And actually, I'm not a Notre Dame football fan either. Actually, I may dislike Notre Dame football more than I dislike Ohio State football. At least Michigan beat Ohio State, right? So if Ohio State wins, I can say that, yeah, it's great you won the national title, but you didn't beat Michigan this year. So, and Michigan's still going to be the only 15-0 team from the last couple of years. So I got that going. But I really do not believe I will watch a second of that game tonight. Not that anyone really cares what I'll do, but it's that is pretty much we don't have to worry about Michigan State because they aren't getting there for a while. But that's pretty much the Michigan fans' football nightmare is Notre Dame versus Ohio State. And in fairness, it would be the same for Ohio State if it was Michigan. I don't think Notre Dame's a huge rival of theirs, but I guess it would be the same for Michigan State if it was Michigan, Ohio State, or something like that. Rivals are not conditioned to like the other team, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same way as a Michigan fan myself. This is kind of the nightmare, I would agree. So definitely a game that's not ideal. But how's your offseason going otherwise? How have things been as you kind of gear up for spring training soon?
Been pretty good. It's picked up a little more of late since the winter meetings. And then, the Sox Fest Live, its new incarnation will be this Friday and Saturday, 5 to 9 at the Ramova Theater. Very interested to see how that works out. It's called Sox Fest Live, and they're doing a very different. I'm going to write about it a little bit in tomorrow's newsletter, but they're doing some different things. But it's still the same basic precepts of the old Sox Fest. The other thing is, though, I do get a kick out. They call it Sox Fest Live. It's not like the other one was taped and then run 3 days later, right? The other one was live too. Everything is live, but just this one's got the actual live. And I think the live connotation is more to have that fans may get more interaction, more direct interaction. Although I kind of had direct interaction at the last one too. I think people are just glad that it's back after not being here since January 2020 was the last Sox Fest they had.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. I know it obviously got derailed from the COVID times, but then it just hasn't come back the past few years. So I think there's a lot of buzz among fans about this coming, event.
Yeah, it was the last, big event for them aside from spring training before COVID. It came around this time in January 2020, then everything shut down like March 16th, right? So it just snuck in there. That was at McCormick Place. And they've gone a different route this time. A smaller, more intimate venue, obviously, which probably kind of also makes sense for the changes they're making. And also, fans, I think there'll be interest, but I'm not sure. I guess it's unfair to guess because fans love these winter get-togethers. They kind of love how, I was helping Jordan Bastian, who's our Cubs reporter, this weekend, just on the media day on Friday at Cubs convention. And the place was packed at the Sheraton. Now, granted, they've been doing it for 38 years, and they were the original one to do it. So they have it down to kind of an art at this point. But I think fans really look forward to this as kind of any fan, not just the Sox, the Cubs, the Pirates, the Tigers, whatever incarnation it is, to kind of set things for the upcoming season.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Getting into, as fans start to think about the offseason, right, looking back on the past few months and then starting to look into the season, what is your kind of general takeaway from this offseason in terms of what the White Sox have been up to? Obviously, the coaching staff was a huge first step. And then from there, no huge moves, right, but a handful of veteran signings, trying to fill roster spots, and then really kind of just getting the focus towards this next core of this team.
Well, they've done a good job developing the infrastructure and doing things that they felt that Chris Getz felt needed to be put back into place that maybe weren't there completely the last time through. But, ultimately it's going to come. It's great to have ways for players to improve. It's great to have players ways to develop. Ultimately, you got to have players, though, right? You could have the best teaching staff in the world, and you got to have the players to come through. So I really think, in my personal point of view, it's going to come down to letting these young guys play this year. Now, not forcing it. Like, you're not going to start Noah Schultz as the opening day starter for the White Sox, obviously. Not when he pitched on a, college Friday schedule last year, maybe even less than that, because he literally had innings pitch count. I mean, Jeff saw it, and that was it. I mean, once it hit that point, wherever it was, he was done pretty much. So, I'm not saying force the issue, but if you have a decision to make at the end of spring training, if you think Colson Montgomery is ready, let him go after it. Let him be the shortstop. Let him see what he can do up there. That was one thing I know Ricky Renteria always talked about is he liked he wanted to have the young guys up there and just kind of let them learn at that level. So if you have them learn this year when you're not, let's be honest, they're not shaped anywhere near a contender right now. I mean, stranger things have happened, but that's not what they look like right now. So let these young guys learn, let these young guys develop, let these young guys have success and have failure. And then when the time comes, and hopefully a year, if not a little longer, then they already kind of know what they have to get through. Colson's talked to me, and I'm sure talked to you guys about how important last year was. Just, he's never struggled in his life, really. I mean, not in baseball, not in basketball, probably not in football, the time he played football. So it's kind of good that he learned it at AAA Charlotte when, no offense to anyone at AAA Charlotte, but the stats, no one ever got to the Hall of Fame because they had a great career at AAA Charlotte. So I think it's great that he picked up that stuff. And I think it's great that he made adjustments mentally as much as physically to move forward. So I think it's really important that nothing against the veterans they signed, Bryce Wilson, Austin Slater, Mike Tauchman, Matt Theis, all seemed like really good guys. I know that was a key thing they were looking for. Again, they did a good job of that last year, was adding strong veteran presences into a young clubhouse. But you got to see the young guys play this year. I mean, again, where it makes sense. So that may mean Chase Maydroth. That may mean Colson Montgomery. That should mean Brian Ramos. I guess Miguel Vargas still falls in that category. So that sort of thing. Maybe, Jonathan Cannon and maybe Sean Burke getting a shot in the rotation, along with Davis Martin, who's not exactly, he's old in the context of prospects, I guess. But giving these guys a shot and letting it go and see what happens and see what you learn. And then the big thing is you can also have an idea, maybe not concrete 100%, but see where you need to fill in around.
Scott, hey, this is Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Well, nice to meet you. I've always enjoyed your work. I'm glad
Same here.
Talk face to face.
Yes.
I'll talk to you a little bit about a lot of the new personnel, especially on the player development side. Do you sense that there is a dramatic change from the past in terms of how they're approaching player development?
Well, I think there's more, they're developing more resources there. They have a research and development department now. And now I know it was important for Chris to get someone who would be the counterpart offensively to Brian Bannister, who is, I don't know his exact title, but he's basically director of pitching for the organization. And that is now Ryan Fuller, who's now the director of hitting, who comes from Baltimore, which had, a number of top young players in their lineup, let alone in their system. What was it? Norfolk, right? Norfolk probably would have won about 40 or 50 games at the big league level last year with some of the players they had in that lineup. But, so he and I think it's just from top to bottom, they feel better about what they have. Chris done a great job assembling the front office. They like the coaching staff they have. I mean, Will Venable, maybe not the hoopla that Ben Johnson has now, but Will Venable was their number one target from all people I talked to, or most of the people I talked to. So they got the guy they want to manage, and he's going to be the guy who's going to be here. It's not going to be, if for some reason they go out and lose 115 games this year or 120 again, doesn't matter. Will Venable is the guy. This is the guy they're building with. This is the guy they intend when, they're contending and these young guys are maturing and hitting their stride, that Will Venable will be the guy. So I think just in general, they feel better off. They feel a little more confident with what they've developed over the last couple of years. Now, again, rebuild or no rebuild, at some point you got to start translating that to the major league level and translate it into wins. Because if you remember right, and I've said this a number of times, Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams did a tremendous job at the start of the rebuild. The people were going nuts. I've used this story 16 times now, but Yohan Moncada's first at bat, it was like an 8-pitch walk, I think. It was 8 pitches, and about the 5th pitch, he followed up, and he got a standing ovation from the crowd. Yeah. So people embraced that rebuild. They embraced the prospects they got. I mean, they got Giolito Dunning and Ronaldo Lopez for Adam Eaton, right? They got Dylan Cease and Eloy Jimenez for Jose Quintana, which ended up working on both sides. Same with the trade, and certainly same with the Sale, Moncada and Kopech trade. But you've got to win. That's the bottom line. So you can have the greatest farm system in the world. That's awesome. And they're quickly moving up the ranks. You can have 6 top 100 prospects. That's awesome too. But as Rick and Kenny saw, who did a great job for, a number of years there until it hit kind of the rut there, in the last year where Tony was sick and then Pedro's 2 years. Well, they were gone for Pedro's second year, but it's got to translate into victories too. And it translated into victories a couple of years, but never into postseason victories, which is what you're ultimately going for.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's something we've continued to harp on. Is like, we can talk all we want about prospects and be excited
Right.
and break them down and everything, but like at some point you have to see that come out on the field, and
Yeah.
like that's the biggest thing. Before we dive into the actual player side, because I want to get your take on some of these, who could break camp, the positional battles. How is kind of just the demeanor of Will Venable? I know you mentioned like he was the top target. I think everybody thought he was going to be, a really good hire. When the hire came out, I think it was generally regarded pretty well. I think he's well liked in the baseball world. What is kind of just the energy that he's bringing to this team heading into the season in comparison to some of these past few years that you mentioned?
I think, I think the energy for all these managers going in was, upbeat. I mean,
Right.
Pedro went into last spring training very upbeat, very confident. I mean, he probably knew they weren't going to contend, but I don't think he also saw what happening, But in terms of Will Venable, which is the question you asked, very low key guy, very not low key, but kind of focused and quiet. At least a little I've had. We got to have the last morning of the winter meetings. They have like a manager's brunch. So each team has a table, and the beat writers sit with the manager, and you talk throughout the brunch and that kind of thing. And just a good guy, good baseball guy. Very well schooled. Worked for a lot of great guys. Worked for Bruce Bochy. Worked for Joe Madden. Worked for Theo Epstein. Played basketball at Princeton. Played in Cameron Indoor Stadium against JJ Redick. He's got a good baseball sports pedigree, and I think he's just he knows what he wants to do. And he may not be a guy who turns over tables, and that maybe he will be. Who knows? But he just seems like we've joked with him. He had one career ejection, which was for a check swing, strike three, and a 10-inning 1-0 loss to the Giants, and that was it. But I just think he's the guy they want leading this young team. I think he'll be good for the young players.
Yeah. That's awesome to hear. I think that's something that, everybody wanted it to be, that kind of energy heading into this season. Do you see any more off-season moves on the docket still? Because I know, it's easy to say, oh, we're done, ready for spring training, whatever, but there's a lot of free agents still out there, whether it just be on the pitching side. There's a handful of top hitters, right? I mean, I know the Bregman and Alonso markets are rather confusing at this point. Obviously, the White Sox aren't in play for those types of guys. But do you see any more moves happening before we start spring training here in a month?
I mean, I think you could use, if you wanted to, maybe another reliever or two or a left-handed bat, but I believe non-roster invites will be announced at some point before Sox Fest, so there may be some options there. Who knows? But, then again, if you start bringing in too many guys to fill it out, I mean, you have to have innings. You have to have at-bats. And like I said, you can't force the young guys in if they're not ready. You can't say, well, George Wokow is a great story. He's from the area. He's 6'6", and he can play center field and hit 500-foot homers. But if he's not ready to be there, you can't put him up in the majors, obviously. So you got to have guys who can do it while they're not there. But again, you don't want to, DH may be a spot where they're able to rotate guys around if they don't have someone who's a full-time guy there. But there are options, but it may come from the NRI list, which we should be seeing soon.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So looking at between, aside from the NRIs, right, there's going to be a lot of guys that compete for spots. We'll start on the rotation side of things, because we've been talking a lot about, we want to see these young pitchers. There's so many pitchers throughout the system, whether it be the guys that already debuted, the guys that haven't debuted yet. Obviously, Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, you wrote a great piece on that earlier. They're not ready yet. They're going to be taken patiently. They're going to be calm with that type of development, because those are your top two pitching prospects. There is a lot of guys between Birmingham, Charlotte, and then Chicago last year that me and Jeff have talked about for the past year. We're ready to see these guys at the big level. We got a taste of Sean Burke. Jonathan Cannon had a very solid rookie season. Yeah. You got, a little bit of a Nastrini, Kai Bush, obviously Davis Martin. Drew Thorpe got a taste before his injury, right? What do you see as, the guys that are likely to make the rotation versus the guys that are going to be trying to make the rotation?
Well, I know I'm going to forget somebody. If you go rotation right now, it's probably Davis Martin, Jonathan
Cannon, Thorpe,
Drew Thorpe, assuming he's fine after the surgery, which they said he was. Martin
right,
Perez, and then is it Sean Burke or is it Bryce Wilson? How do they decide to use Bryce Wilson, and do they believe Sean Burke? I'll tell you, I picked Sean Burke as my breakout guy, and I'm just basing it on what I saw in the short time last year with the Sox, and he seemed to have that kind of extra gear. And Grady Sizemore talked about that he's not afraid of the big moment, which sounds very cliche, and is cliche, but it does translate out there. You see that when you watch him pitch. And remember, he's just a couple years removed from being a top 5 White Sox prospect. So it's not like this came from nowhere. And then, I'm sure there's going to be some young guys who are going to have a chance to be in that bullpen. We saw, why am I blanking on his name now? The left-hander who slams Fraser Ellard. He had a nice run last year. Perlander Baroa had a nice run. So you're going to see those guys. I know Adler had a good season last year. at the minor level. And I had heard about midway through last year that he even had a chance of September call up. It didn't happen, but he's someone who could be in there. So, and then, you have the kind of infield mix, which you don't really know which way it's going, right? I mean, third base is probably Vargas. So then does Ramos become the DH? Does Ramos start with the White Sox? And then, you have probably Tauchman and Slater in the outfield with Benintendi and Robert, at least for now, right? As long as, there's no trades in the immediate future, which doesn't seem like. Vaughn at first, probably Lee and Theis behind the plate. But, I think both Caro and Teal are going to make quick cases to get there. And Caro was with the team at the end of last year on the taxi squad. So got to look at the last week, of Major League Baseball. And then you have the whole infield. Is Colson lined up right now as the shortstop? There really doesn't appear to be a lock at shortstop. Right now, I forgot, at third base, Josh Rojas, too, obviously. It could be in that, but he could also play second. But you have Brooks Baldwin. You have Lenine Sosa, who had a nice finish to last year. Who am I forgetting in that group? I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Who's that?
Miedroth as well, coming over from Boston.
Yes, Miedroth, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of guys who can work in there. It's just, I don't think it's going to be, I think they have an idea what they want right now, because you never base it totally on spring training numbers, obviously. That just doesn't, translate accurately all the time. Although I do think it's more important for a young guy like Colson or a young guy like Burke than it is for like Luis Robert. If Luis Robert hits 190 in spring training, who cares, right? But I mean, you may want to see a little more from the guys who are competing like Colson for a spot. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they play this all out, how it works out, and if any, who does break and who is shortly thereafter once the season gets going.
Right. So I think the middle infield is I want to talk catching too a little more, but I think the middle infield, like you mentioned, is fascinating because Vargas and Rojas are going to be on the roster, it seems like. Vaughn is going to be on the roster, right? So then you've got a situation where between Baldwin, Sosa, Colson, and Miedroth, right, there's very little chance all those guys crack the roster. So then it becomes like
especially if you include Rojas, right? I mean, if you include Rojas, there's almost no chance for them on the roster, right?
All those guys can't. So I think one thing that we're curious about is if you're going to give more run to a guy like Lenine Sosa, who you've seen for a while, or if you're just going to say, hey, Miedroth or Colson or Brooks, who we haven't seen much of, we just want to see those guys with that full action now.
Well, I think Brooks, when he was healthy last year, showed that he kind of understands it too. He understands the kind of amalgamated role where he can play everywhere, including the outfield if need be. So I think he's ready to take on that kind of responsibility. And I think he's probably got a leg up in that role. Then again, you have Rojas now though too. So who knows how that kind of all works together. But it's going to be, we'll find out a little more. We're meeting with Chris and Will Venable have a meeting with the media Thursday at the ballpark before Sox Fest on Friday, which is good because it's good to get those guys kind of out of the way, hear their whole thing, and then you can focus on the players on Friday. But we'll find a little more, and they may not even be able to give us concrete answers at this point. But Chris has talked about, that there is a chance Colson could break camp. Now, very rarely you're going to say a guy can't break camp when he's close, right? You don't want to do that to a player. I mean, you probably will say, if someone asks about Noah, you won't, you're going to say, no, he's not breaking camp with the team. I remember one year we were talking when Chris was still minor league director, and someone had DM'd me who knew Colson from Indiana and watched him play basketball, watched him play baseball. And he was, I guess, at Birmingham at that point, and said to me, this guy has the makings where if you put him in the big leagues right now, he'd be good. He's that strong a player. He's that strong a presence. So I was talking with Chris and Scott Greger in the dugout. Scott Greger has since retired. Great guy, did a great job at the Daily Herald. And I said to Chris about that. And Chris, that you don't see Chris get like riled too often. Chris is pretty corporate, cool. And he kind of looked at me like, what? Like, you're bringing Colson up now? He's barely even played at Birmingham. And I think he missed the point. Maybe I didn't make the point clearly enough that, people have said that this guy has the makeup that he can handle it now. But hey, you play basketball in high school basketball in Indiana, you're playing pro ball pretty much already, right? That's the way it comes down to. So, but that was pretty funny. Chris still kids me to this day, and I kid him about, when there's some, like when Noah Schultz was cruising along last year, I'd text him and say, you caught him up yet? That kind of thing. So there's got to be a balance. But I think if I had to pick one to look at going into spring training, it would be Colson. I really do believe that despite him hitting 215 or whatever it was last year, that he found something those last 99 games. I'm sorry, not 99 games, last 99 plate appearances. He found something during the short stint where he played mostly third base in the fall league. And I think he can carry that over. And he seems very confident. I talked to him, saw the interview with MLB Network today. very upbeat, very ready to go. And I think he knows he's got a viable chance.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned the AFL a little bit. Do you think he is getting looked at this point as a potential third baseman at the big league level? Because I know it's been talked about before. Everybody's always been kind of, if he gets too big, he moves him to third and he's good at third base, right? But like the White Sox have made it clear they want him to be a shortstop. He's made it clear. Like
Right.
He told me and Jeff last summer when we talked to him in Charlotte, he was like, I plan to be a shortstop. I want to play shortstop. I've been working there. Do you think that if he were to make the team, it's tricky because you've got Vargas and Ramos there as well, but do you think they would be looking to give him reps at third, or would he just solely be a shortstop when he gets called up this season?
I remember when Tim Anderson first got drafted by the Sox and started playing a little bit. And Tim is such a great athlete. He was a champion basketball player too. I used to joke with who would win on a one-on-one between Tim and Colson there, but people talked about, Tim could end up in center field. He's that good an athlete, And Tim was determined. He was playing short. And, during that stretch where he was one of the top guys in the game overall as a player, one of the most prominent guys, he played pretty decently in shortstop. I think Colson has that same feel. Now, I think he showed whatever the reason for, and they say it was because by the time they listed him on the Glendale roster, there already were a couple guys who were dedicated, like featured players for other teams. I forgot the exact word on what it is, but so they had the priority to play shortstop. But he handled himself well over the 7 games he played there. And I've heard some people suggest, from in and outside the organization, he could end up there someday. Who knows? Colson does not believe that. Colson made that point clear to me. And then on the Zoom with the rest of the writers, he is not wants to be. That conveys like he's got to fight to get that job. He is a shortstop, and that's his job. Now, if he makes the team and they need him at third base one day, he's shown he can do that, right? But he would break camp with the team as their shortstop. He would not break camp as anything else.
Yeah. And you know what? That probably speaks to that same toughness that the Indiana basketball,
right?
Yeah, that toughness. Like, I'm going to be the guy who's in the middle of the infield.
And you got to believe that, right? Sometimes people get upset when players make boasts or like Edgar Carroll told me earlier this offseason, right after they got Teal, as a matter of fact, that he thinks the team's going to be competitive this year, because there's going to be a lot of young guys who are going to be hungry. He didn't say they're going to win 100 games. He didn't say they're going to win the division. He just said, we're going to be competitive. And fans are like, oh my God, players say this every offseason. Well, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't be mad about that, right? Players don't say that. You probably don't want them. But players come in and say, oh man, we're sunk. I better, look for my numbers this year, or I better hope that I get traded by, July. That's not going to get you very far. Reality will eventually come to get you one way or the other, but you got to believe in your ability, and you got to believe in your team overall when you start things like this.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of Caro, I've been on record myself saying that I think he deserves at least the chance to make the roster out of camp, because I think last year he showed offensively that he's, developed a lot last season, right? He started to tap into his power. He adjusted his swing a little bit. He looked like a complete big league hitter in the minor leagues last year, and the defense has progressed. Pitchers like working with him. Everything I've heard from him the past 2 years in Birmingham, and then when we talked to him in Charlotte last year, was like, that he's working really carefully with all these young arms, and that they like working with him. He's developing a plan there. Do you think him or Teal are more likely than the other? Or, with the Tice signing and Corey Lee being there, do you think they're just going to be patient with both those guys and hold them off till, May or June possibly?
First of all, I liked what Corey Lee did last year. I think he got a little overworked near the end, and not near the end, but like about halfway through, his offensive numbers started taking a dive. But pitchers like throwing to him. He's a good leader in that clubhouse. He's a good guy to command the pitching staff. Now, with that said, I do believe he has options. I haven't checked that recently, but I'm pretty sure he does. And, Theis will be on that team, obviously. Lee could be, I suppose, a trade candidate if they feel like one of those two guys is ready. But I think it's good to have options like that in the middle of the diamond. And I know there's been a lot of interest in the White Sox catcher since they added Teal from inside and outside the organization. Not knowing Teal very well and not really seeing him play a ton, I can't say like if Caro or Teal has advantage. I know exactly what you said about Caro is what I heard. Everything you said to a T is what I heard, and I think he's pretty close to ready to to make a run at the major leagues. So he's another guy. Both him and Teal are two to watch during spring training. But yeah, it'll be they're going to have 4 viable catchers in the mix there going into spring training. It'll be interesting to see how it plays. I suppose one of them who's not catching could serve as DH if you use that as a rotating spot. But that's always tough, unless you carry 3 catches, which I highly doubt they will. I guess they could. If they have one targeted to DH more than the other or something like that, then it's possible. But it's going to be an interesting mix because they have 4 guys who can do the job back there.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said for if those guys are in Charlotte together, you get to learn kind of how they can share the catching
True.
role versus first
Yeah.
base versus DH, right? Like you can almost prepare the two of them to do that together at the big league level if they start in Charlotte together, and then you can bring them up mid-season or wherever it is, even if it's as early as May or June, right? And then you already have them kind of slightly prepared for that splitting of the catching duties potentially.
Right. And let's put it this way. We were talking about, look at the young guys this year, but don't rush. I mean, if you feel like that's a good idea, and I think what you said is a good idea, then you do have the veterans to handle it at the big leagues without blinking an eye, right? I mean, Corey Lee and Matt Thaiss can handle it at the major league level. You're not like, well, we're not really confident up here. No, they're going to do a good job with the young pitchers. So it's good to have both sides of the options. If you feel like you can push and maybe one of them can make it, or if you want to give them a little time in Charlotte and see what happens.
Yeah.
Scott,
And Tio also is an athlete, and he's played, outfield. He's played first base. I think he said he played second base at some point. He won't be the second baseman for the Sox, but there's other options with him there. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
That's all right. I was just going to take that point one step further about bringing the young guys along. Are you reasonably confident that, say, by the All-Star break, that we see this sea change in the lineup that's dominated by the young guys?
So you mean predominantly young guys in the lineup by the All-Star break? Yeah, I think it could be even earlier than that, but I think if Colson doesn't break with the team, I would be very surprised if it took him, much longer to get up there. I don't think this is going to be like, if you're looking at Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith, if they see any time this year, it would probably be very late in the season and probably out of the bullpen, right? Or as like an opener, where you can control how much they throw and that kind of thing. But with Colson, I don't think it's going to be very long if he doesn't break with the team. I think, with Ramos, he's proven he's ready, right? I mean, Caro is not far away. Again, I don't know enough I just know what I've heard and been told. Don't know enough firsthand about Teal and Middoroff. Obviously Braden Montgomery is not close yet because he missed all of last season. And then, younger outfielders they have right now. They have, Dominic Fletcher. Is Colas still in the mix? Doesn't seem fully in the mix, but looking at his Instagram he looks like he's working his butt off this offseason. So he's ready for whatever the challenge brings, I guess. But I do think, there'll be, the other thing about some of these veterans, they have not only good guys, but guys who probably, Rojas, Perez, maybe even Slater or Tauchman could be candidates come July where you can add to your core, if you can get something good in return. So good options on both sides there.
Yeah, definitely.
And while we're talking about the All-Star break, do you see Luis Robert on the team after the break?
Boy, it's tough to predict, but let's put it this way. I think they will trade him if they get exactly what they want for him. Like, this is not we have to get rid of his contract. Luis Robert works his tail off. Good guy, had a rough stretch last year by his own admission. Came back from a very extended injury, cost him, a couple months. But they're not going to sell it it sounds terrible. It's not about a player like this. They're not going to trade him value-wise on 80 cents on the dollar. Like, I think Chris made this clear at the winter meetings that they were pleasantly surprised at the offers they were getting for him, meaning that people know his value. People know that it's just 2 years removed from maybe the most complete season in White Sox history, at least in recent memory. We're doing a little bit of everything, the stolen bases, the doubles, the homers, the defense, the average. So I think, if they can trade him and get what they want, they will move him. There's no question, because this is last year guaranteed. He has the $20 million options, I think, over the next 2 years. So yeah, I would be surprised, but I also know they won't force the issue. But again, I can say this, if some team comes calling Friday and gives them exactly what they want, we may have an announcement at Sox Fest. I think it's that fluid where, he could be the guy. He could be the guy for a while in the Sox, or he could be going very quickly, depending on what the offers come to Chris and the front office.
I think that makes sense. And I think one of the hard part to consider is what if he does struggle like last season, right? You obviously don't want that to happen, but it's like you have to balance that out of getting what you want, but also having to be real with it and understand that if he struggles out of the gate, then you're losing more value given his contract, the situation with team options after this season, right? So
and that happened with Cease last year, right, in spring training. They didn't force anything, but I think they decided at that point later in the spring, especially the way he was throwing the heck out of the ball in spring training, that this is the best time to move him. Let's get teams to make their final offers. We're going to decide on that. And maybe they do that with Robert. Maybe that comes to, the second week in March and they say the same thing. All right, who's interested? what's the offer and make the decision from there.
Yeah, exactly. A few more arms I want to ask you about. I appreciate you, breaking all these guys down for us. Jairo Iriarte, got a chance last year in the bullpen, right? It was kind of just a way to give him a sample, but I think from all indications that he is still, the intention is still for him to be a starting pitcher. Do you think that for him, it's like, is it just go back to Charlotte and like get starts there to then hopefully be up as a starter later in the year? Or do you think there's a chance that he just ends up sticking in the bullpen as a high impact reliever?
I mean, it's a good question. You can only have so many starters, right? So, I mean, he could end up being a decent, high-end reliever, a guy who could work multiple innings for you, a guy who could maybe work one inning later in the game for you. I mean, there's a little bit of option on everything for him there. Oh, sorry, my phone's feeling a little bit there. So, yeah, I could see him starting the season in either way. I mean, the big thing for him, I think, starter or reliever is just throwing strikes, right? He's got great stuff. It's just commanding the zone is the key thing for Iriarte.
Yep, 100%. And then a guy like Mason Adams, not sure how much you've gotten to watch him pitch. I know he was he did the little week in Chicago last year to work with some of the coaches there. Mason Adams is, like you said, you can only have so many starters, but Adams is a guy that among all these starters had probably one of the best seasons in minor leagues last year, other than a Noah Schultz, right? In terms of he was dominant in Birmingham. He only had a few starts in Charlotte because he got banged up a little bit, but like he was amazing in Birmingham the entire time he was there.
Right.
Do you see him as, I don't think he's a break camp candidate just because there's so many other arms probably ahead of him right now still, and he hasn't had that AAA experience yet. But do you see him as somebody that could, force his way into the rotation sooner than later, just given how good he was last year?
I think so, and I'm sure he'll be at spring training as a non-roster invite. That would make sense. I know in talking to John Eli, fellow Homewood Flossmoor High School graduate who sadly is no longer with the organization, but for a good reason, had a son and wanted to be more family focused. I asked him before he left, for some analysis of some players, and he raved about Noah. He loves Noah Schultz, as everyone in the organization does. But he mentioned Mason as a guy who really impressed him last year and really came a long way. So I think Mason is not just on your guys' radar, but he's on the White Sox radar too. And like you said, he did have that, kind of workout week in Chicago where he got to know the organization a little better. And yeah, I think he's a guy who's in play for at some point for 2025.
Yeah, definitely.
While we're talking about pitchers, I wanted to get your thoughts on Grant Taylor and what you're hearing from the White Sox and if they're pleased with his development and the upside for him.
Good things, just, healthy is the key thing. I mean, I think they feel like they really got a steal when they drafted him because he was hurt when they drafted him, right? Or he was recovering.
Yeah, he was coming back off
surgery. Yeah. And, we talked to him at some point during this offseason and early on, very confident kid. Talked about being teammates with or working with Paul Skeens and how Skeens has told him that, hey, I see this stuff. Now Skeens is otherworldly, right? I mean, it may come down to Skeens and Sasaki as the best young pitching prospects in the last 20 years, but he said, I see your stuff and I see what happens up here. I'm paraphrasing what Grant said, and that, you can handle this. You're going to be able to do this. So I think Grant's excited to put in, a longer season of work. I'm not sure if he'll be there as a non-roster invite this year, but a lot of these guys, it's great if they are non-roster, even if it's guys like Noah and Hagan who will be there for 2 weeks before they get sent to minor league camp, right? But they get an experience. They get to sit with the veterans. I remember Joe Kelly arguing and telling the story Noah's first year, I think, how Noah Schultz should have been in big league spring training. His stuff was that ridiculous. I think they worked out together in Arizona or something. I'm pretty sure it was Noah Schultz that he was talking about that he said this, but it benefits him, even if it's there even if you're there for 2.5 weeks or the first cuts, you get to see it a little bit. But yeah, Grant Taylor is another one in that mix. So again, you got to start kind of sorting out like who is the group, excuse me, we see as starters and who's the relievers going forward.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
100%. No, it's going to be tricky because there's a lot of arms, and that's a good problem to have, of course. We've been talking about this all offseason.
Yeah, way ahead, obviously, arms versus bats right now. So try and balance that as the future goes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it was very clear that, the Crochet trade was gonna target bats, and they did a great job bringing 3 bats who are, hopeful pieces, right? But when you've got a lot of pitchers, it's like, it's one thing we kind of try to reiterate, like a guy transitioning to a reliever doesn't have to be looked at as a bad thing. And I think it's very easy for fans to see like, Jake Eater and some of these other guys that are high level pitching prospects starting to maybe become a reliever and get it viewed in like, oh, they couldn't cut it as a starter. Okay, sure. But there's also only 5 rotation spots. And at the end of the day, there's 15, 20 young pitchers in the system right now that we're looking at as potential big leaguers. So a lot of those guys are going to have to be relievers at some point, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Especially the way playoffs go now, right? I mean, starters barely, if you get the starter at 5 or 6 innings, I mean, I always joke about this, that what we saw in '05 in the LCS will never, ever happen again in baseball history. 4 straight complete games, and then Contreras threw 8 1/3 in the first game. So that will never be even close to repeated. So relievers are a valuable commodity, no question about that. And, the other thing to keep in mind is not right now, probably not anytime in the near future, but, eventually you may move someone out of the, as part of a trade package to get someone back that you need if you have this plethora of arms and they all, pretty much work out to what you expect.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Scott, we're sort of getting near the end here. We don't want to take too much more of your time. There's one more guy I want to ask about because I ask every guest about him.
Okay.
And that's Nishida down in Birmingham now.
Yeah.
I had a chance to watch him in Kannapolis and Winston-Salem, and it's just a blast. And I'm just curious, are you hearing any buzz about him in Chicago?
Yeah, I think, he's put his name on the map for White Sox front office people, those I've talked to. I mean, what did Paul Yanish say last year? That he leads the league in personality, that's for sure. But he also led the minors in runs scored, right? And I got to interview him at the beginning of this offseason. Great guy to talk to, and very ambitious, kind of motivated, has other, I think he has his own business going too while he's, and he was mad at himself that he only, I don't have the total in front of me, but that he only stole.
Steals,
How much did he have total?
He had 49, and he was upset he didn't hit 50. That's what he told me.
Yeah,
at least.
he wanted 80. He said he should be an 80 this year. He said with the amount of times that he gets on base, he should be an 80. So, I mean, he's very confident kid. He really liked when he got moved to second base last year. He liked that spot. I mean, I would hope, and again, we'll find out the list soon. I would hope he's on the NRIs because that would be an interesting thing to watch him in action, maybe. And I don't know if he'd make it to the Cactus League games if he was, but I guess you don't even have to be on NRIs to get into the Cactus League games. But I do think that he's a guy who brings a very unique skill set. I was going to say set of skills and went both into the equation, and it's something that can be valuable. He's not going to hit. I know he wanted to work on his power a little bit this offseason, but either way, he's not going to hit a ton of home runs. But this is a guy who, I remember doing a story on Terrell Tatum a couple years ago, who unfortunately didn't have the same kind of year in 24 that he did previously. But he was another one who believed, like, hey, I can go up there and make things happen because I can steal 60 bases. And I think Nishida is the same thing, and a pretty decent hitter, for a very good approach at the plate, too, from what it seems.
Yeah. I don't know. I imagine they don't track it, but I have to think he led the minor leagues in the number of pitches seen.
That makes sense. I mean, Sergio raved about what he meant just in the short time he was with Birmingham, helping them win the title last year. So people notice him. I'm not sure where he's at in terms of the chart, but they notice what he's doing for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's all I've got. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We're both going to be out in Arizona in March. So hopefully we'll see you out there. And we appreciate you talking White Sox with us, and we're looking forward to hopefully at least a fun 2025, I think.
We should have done this from like 6:30 to 9, so I could have skipped the game and just talked to you guys about the Sox the whole time. But this worked, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, guys. See you in Arizona.
Thank you so much, guys.